This is Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I'm here with allfreeknitting.com to show you how to dye a gradient of yarn onto this skein of 100% wool here with food coloring. The dye bath has water that is leftovers from some other dyeing projects, so there's still some color. The ratio of acid to water is there's a tablespoon of white vinegar per cup of water. I'm going to turn on the stove at low heat so the dye bath can start heating up. And I want the water level to actually be a little higher than it's been in some of my other tutorials, because I want to make sure it's deep enough that I can dip everything without a problem. So I'm going to add a little more water. And you can always feel free to add more water to your dye bath even after you've added however much vinegar. And so I think that I want this gradient to be a blue-green. So I've got my food coloring droppers, and I'm going to start adding some color. Eight, 9, 10, 15 drops of blue, and 15 drops of green. Whoops. It's a little more than 15, but again, it's not an exact science. And I'm going to stir up the dye bath, and we've got this pretty teal color here that we'll use for this dyeing experiment. And you can see that the color I have in the dye bath is pretty dark, and so I want to have a lot of dye to when I'm working on this gradient. And I am going to carefully watch the dye bath and let it simmer, and then we'll be back to start the dip dyeing. Okay, the dye bath is now simmering lightly, and so I'm going to take from back, I guess in the corner, take the skein of yarn out of the water where it's resting, wring it out gently, and I'm ready to start dipping it into the dye. Now I'm going to dip, in order to get the gradient, I'm going to dip at first all except for the very tip, and I'm already starting to draw it out. And with my fingers, careful because it's hot, I'm actually going to work a little bit of the color, well, maybe not. Sometimes you can help the color move up just by moving it up into the tip a bit more. But you can see that I'm gradually pulling more and more of the yarn out of the dye bath. And you can see already, if we can just compare that, we're already getting a nice gradient. So if I pull it all out, and let's see if I can get it all in the shot. If I pull it all out, there we go, we have a gradient already. Gonna, whoops. And you can, you can continue dipping, kind of like making candles when you were a kid, to try to get the ends to be as dark as you would want them to be. And so your arms don't get tired, you do have the option of letting this rest on something else, or having a plate and leaving part in the dye bath and holding it off to the side. But since this is almost done, I am going to keep going like this. I think actually, woo, that's a little hot. There we go. I didn't really want the tip to be super white, so I just really quickly dipped it into the dye and kind of moved the color around. So maybe some of that will stick. And so there's a teeny bit of white, but not a ton. And so, woo, yeah, I will, when I'm done getting the last tip, then I will come back and show you how I wash it. So I've actually now put some other yarn in the dye bath to help use up the remaining green dye. But now I've got our nice gradient over here, and we're now going to take it to the sink to wash it. Oops. So in the sink I have, sorry, there you go. I have some lukewarm water running in this little pot, and I'm expecting that we'll see some color, oh, maybe not that much, come out of the skein. But we'll wash it with some mild soap, and you want to wash it until the water runs clean. And you don't want to give a ton of agitation, you don't want it to felt, but just enough to try to get you want to get any excess dye out of the fibers, because you do not want the dye to end up on your clothes or to stain whatever you're knitting with. So here is our beautiful gradient of pale green that deepens up to a very deep dark green here in the center of the spiral. And what this tutorial is also good for is showing you that the longer you keep the dye in the dye bath, when you have a lot of very concentrated dye, the darker color you will get, as stands to reason. Thank you for watching this tutorial on how to dip dye yarn to get a color gradient. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and this tutorial was brought to you by allfreeknitting.com.